The cheapest thing on the county auction sheet was not a broken mower, not a rusted trailer, not even a box of seized office chairs. It was land, 14 acres of it, black water, moss, leaning spruce, and a warning stamped across the file in red ink: no buildable access. The auctioneer tried $20. Nobody moved. He tried 10. A man in the second row laughed into his coffee. Then a woman in the back lifted one hand. 13. That was all Nora Reyes said. $13. 46 people turned around like she had just volunteered to drown. Nora was 32 years old, unemployed, sleeping in her aunt's spare room, and carrying a field notebook from a dead grandmother who had written one sentence on the inside cover: "The water is the crop." By noon, Nora owned the bog nobody would touch. By sunset, half the county believed she had bought the dumbest piece of ground in northern Maine. 5 years later, that same piece of ground would be worth more than every dry acre around it. But on the morning the gavel fell, all anyone saw was mud. The auction was held inside the Public Works garage because the courthouse basement had flooded the week before. That was the first joke. A room full of men bidding on land while rainwater dripped into buckets beside the snowplows. It was November 2020, the first hard cold of the season, the kind that makes metal chairs feel like punishment. Diesel smell hung under the rafters. Fluorescent lights buzzed over folding tables. Every bidder had a clipboard. Every bidder had a coffee. Every bidder had a reason to be there. Except Nora. She had driven 91 miles in a Subaru with a heater that worked only when it felt generous. She had $1,860 in her checking account, one duffel bag in the trunk, and a pink slip from the hotel in Bangor where she used to run night audit until the owner sold the place and the new company decided a software subscription could do her job cheaper. The only reason she was sitting in that garage was the envelope her grandmother Carmen had left in a kitchen drawer. $480 in old 20s, a property notice, and the field notebook. Most of the notebook was weather, dates, water levels, birds, frost. Nothing that looked useful to anyone normal. But on page 11, Carmen had drawn a rough map of a peat bog off Sable Road. Lot 41, 14 acres. And under it, in pencil, pressed so hard it scarred the next page, she had written, "Do not let them scrape it. Your great-grandfather planted the edges in 1979. The water is the crop." Nora had read that sentence 20 times and understood less each time. Still, when the tax sale list arrived in the mail 3 weeks later, Lot 41 was on it. Unpaid taxes, no approved septic, no road frontage except a logging lane, wetland restrictions, assessed value, 0. The auctioneer got to it near the end, after 2 pickup trucks a snowblower, and 6 acres of gravel pit had already sold. He cleared his throat like the next lot embarrassed him. Parcel 41-B, 14.2 acres, Sable Road, Township Line, peat and wetland. Back taxes cleared by sale. Opening bid, 20. Silence. Not polite silence. The kind of silence that tells a room the joke has arrived. He looked down at the sheet again. 10. A farmer named Eli Calder gave one short laugh. Eli owned the equipment yard outside town, plus half the rental houses, plus a smile that always arrived before the insult. "Only thing you can raise out there is mosquitoes," he said. The room chuckled. The auctioneer smiled because he had to. 5, then. Anyone at 5? Nora's hand rose before she had permission from the part of her brain that still believed in survival. The auctioneer pointed. 5? Her mouth had gone dry. 13. That number came from the notebook. Carmen had circled 13 water markers on her map. Nora didn't know why. It just felt better than 5. The auctioneer frowned. $13? Yes. Going once took forever. Going twice took longer. Eli turned around in his chair and looked at Nora like he was trying to remember where he had seen her before, then deciding it wasn't worth the effort. The gavel hit. Sold to bidder 22 for $13. Nora paid with a 10, 3 ones, and a hand that would not stop shaking. The clerk gave her a receipt and a deed packet still warm from the printer. She signed on the hood of her Subaru because the garage office was full. Outside, cold rain had started again. Eli Calder walked past her toward his truck. "You know what you bought?" Nora folded the deed. "Land." "No," Eli said. "You bought a problem with property lines." He laughed, but softly, almost kindly. That made it worse. Nora watched his truck leave. Then she sat in her Subaru for 6 minutes, the deed on her lap, the rain tapping the windshield, and the same sentence turning over in her head. The water is the crop. She drove to Sable Road before going home. The logging lane was barely a lane, more like an old scar between spruce trees. Frozen puddles cracked under her tires. Branches scraped the doors. Twice she had to stop and drag fallen limbs out of the way with bare hands because she had no gloves thick enough for the cold. At the end of the lane, the world opened into something that did not look like property. It looked like a wound that had filled with sky. Black pools spread between floating mats of moss. Low cranberries clung to red runners near the edges. Tamarack needles, yellow and thin, trembled over the water. Everything moved a little, even when nothing moved. The ground gave under her boots like a breathing animal. Nora stepped out and sank to her ankle. "Great," she whispered. She took out Carmen's notebook and tried to match the drawing to the land in front of her. North Ridge, old cedar stump, 3 pools, 13 markers. Most were gone. One was not. A rusted length of rebar stood beside a black spruce. Orange survey tape, faded, almost white, still tied around it. Nora pushed through knee-high brush and found a second marker. Then a third. Each one sat at the edge of a slightly raised mat, as if someone had once tried to outline the place where wet became usable. Near the fourth marker, she saw red, not tape, berries. Tiny, hard cranberries, half hidden under frost and moss, glowing like drops of paint on the dark ground. She knelt, picked one, bit it. Her whole face tightened. Sour, bitter, alive. Exactly like the berries Carmen used to put in sauce every Thanksgiving. The ones she said came from our wet place, before everyone in the family stopped asking what that meant. Nora picked 6 more and put them in her pocket. Then she saw the moss. It was thick, pale green at the tips and copper underneath, springy, clean, layered deep enough that her fingers disappeared to the knuckle. Sphagnum. She knew the word because Carmen had said it once while repotting orchids on the porch. Never buy the cheap, dry kind, Carmen had told her. The good stuff grew somewhere wet before someone understood what they were stealing. Nora did not know yet that orchid growers bought live sphagnum. She did not know restoration companies bought it by the tray to rebuild damaged wetlands. She did not know cranberry runners could be propagated, or that willow cuttings could be sold for erosion control, or that acidic bog water had its own market logic if a person was stubborn enough to find it. All she knew was that the land did not feel dead. It felt ignored. That night, she spread Carmen's notebook on her aunt's kitchen table beside the berries from her pocket. Her Aunt Rosa looked at the berries, then at Nora. "Tell me those are not from the swamp." "Bog," Nora said. "That does not make it better." Nora didn't answer. She was too busy reading, page after page. Water depth, plantings, red runners set along east mat, moss plugs holding, do not drain after spring thaw, sedge cutting failed, willow living, stake more next year. Carmen had not left a mystery. She had left instructions in a language Nora did not speak yet. So Nora started learning. She spent the next week in the library, then the county extension office, then the conservation district, carrying the notebook in a plastic grocery bag because she was afraid of ruining it. Most people were polite in the way people are polite when they think grief has made someone eccentric. Then she met Mary Ann Pike. Mary Ann ran the soil and water district out of a back office that smelled like wet maps and burnt coffee. She was 60, sharp-eyed, with mud on her boots that looked permanent. Nora showed her the notebook. Mary Ann read 3 pages standing up. Then she sat down. "Who wrote this?" "My grandmother." She knew what she was looking at. Nora leaned forward. Is it worth anything? Marianne took off her glasses. That is the wrong first question. It is the only question I can afford. Marianne looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, Live sphagnum can sell to specialty growers and restoration suppliers. Cranberries, if clean, can sell local. Willow stakes are boring but useful. The problem is not value. The problem is proof. Buyers don't pay for a story. They pay for clean product, consistent quantity, and someone who answers the phone. That last part felt like a door, small but open. Marianne wrote 3 names on a sticky note. A plant nursery in Vermont, a restoration supply company outside Portland, a farm-to-table bakery in Ellsworth. Start tiny, she said. Samples first. Weight, moisture, photos, where harvested. Do not strip the bog. Do not damage the mat. And for the love of everything, do not tell Eli Calder what I said. Nora looked up. You know him? Everyone knows Eli. He has been trying to buy wet parcels around Sable Road for 2 years. Why? Marianne's mouth tightened. Because if he gets enough of them, he can ask the town to reroute the drainage ditch and call it flood control. After that, dry lots become house lots. Nora felt Carmen's sentence shift inside her. Do not let them scrape it. It was not nostalgia. It was a warning. Nora called the nursery first because it sounded least intimidating. The owner, a man named Paul Kersey, answered while loading trucks. She told him she had live sphagnum. He asked what species. She went quiet. He sighed. Send photos, top, side, close. Include pH if you have it. If it's clean and alive, I might test 20 flats. How much is a flat worth? Depends. $10 to $12 wholesale. Nora wrote that down so hard the pen tore the paper. 20 flats at $11 each. $220. Not life-changing, but not zero. She bought a cheap pH meter, borrowed pruning shears, and turned Rosa's laundry room into something between a nursery and a crime scene. Plastic trays on the floor, moss on screens, labels made from masking tape, a fan from the attic, a spray bottle, Carmen's notebook open to the planting map. The first attempt failed in 3 days. The moss browned at the edges, too dry. The second attempt molded, too wet. The third stayed green. Nora stared at those trays every morning like they were newborn animals. By the end of December, she had 22 flats of live sphagnum stacked in the back of her Subaru, each one wrapped, labeled, and misted. The drive to Vermont took 6 hours. Paul met her behind the nursery, opened the first tray, and said nothing. He touched the moss, lifted it, checked the roots, the color, the smell. Still nothing. Nora hated him for being quiet. Finally, he said, "This is better than the Canadian shipment I got last month." She forgot how to breathe. He bought 20 flats for $230 and asked if she could bring 60 in March. "I can try," Nora said. "Do not try," Paul said. "Plan." On the way home, she stopped at a gas station and cried in the parking lot, with both hands on the steering wheel. Not because $230 solved anything, because the bog had spoken in a language someone else understood. January made everything harder. The bog froze, then thawed, then froze again, with a crust just strong enough to trick a boot and just weak enough to punish confidence. Nora worked mornings because the surface held better before the sun rose. She marked harvest zones with blue flags and promised herself she would never take more than a small patch from any mat. That promise slowed her down. It also saved the crop. She learned the bog was not a field. A field forgave straight lines. The bog did not. Step wrong, and water filled the print. Pull too much, and the mat tore. Cut too close, and spring growth weakened. Every inch required permission. She hated that at first. Then she realized it was the point. Carmen had not written, "The land is the crop." She had written, "The water." The value was in keeping the system alive. In February, Nora tried selling cranberries. She cleaned 8 pounds by hand, picked leaves out with tweezers, packed them in paper pint boxes, and paid $30 for a table at the winter market. She sold 1 pint to a child who thought they were cherries and cried after tasting them. By noon, the berries were softening, and Nora was standing behind a table that smelled tart and humiliating, while people walked past to buy honey and candles. She packed up early. On the way home, she stopped at a bakery in Ellsworth because it was one of Mary Ann's names and because failure had made her angry enough to be brave. The baker, June Adel, was rolling dough behind the counter. Nora held up a pint box. "I have wild bog cranberries." June wiped flour on her apron. "Fresh?" "Frozen now, mostly." "Clean?" "Cleaner than my apartment." June almost smiled. She tasted one, winced, then tasted another. "That is not supermarket cranberry." "No." "Good." June bought the remaining 7 pounds for $3 a pound and told Nora to bring 20 next time. "People don't want raw cranberries," June said. "They want someone else to know what to do with them." That became Nora's second rule. Value was not always in the product. Sometimes value was in finding the person who could translate it. By spring she had 3 tiny buyers: Paul for live sphagnum, June for cranberries, a shoreline contractor in Portland for willow stakes after Mary Ann introduced them. The stakes were simple: cut dormant willow, bundle by length, keep cool, deliver before bud break. 25 cents a stake. Boring money. Reliable money. Nora loved boring money. She cut 1,800 steaks in March and earned $450. Her hands blistered through 2 pairs of gloves. She kept the receipt taped to Carmen's notebook, not because it was large, because it was evidence. By June 2021, the evidence had grown heavy enough to need a shoebox. Receipts, invoices, delivery slips, buyer emails, pH readings, harvest maps, photos printed at the pharmacy, because Nora did not trust her phone not to die at the worst possible moment. That was when Eli Calder came back. Nora was kneeling beside the south pool, lifting sphagnum plugs into trays when she heard tires on gravel. Eli's truck stopped at the end of the logging lane. He walked in wearing boots too clean for the place. "Nora Reyes," he said, "you've been busy." She kept working. "Eli." "I'll make this simple. 40,000 cash for the parcel." Her hand stopped in the moss. 40,000. The number moved through her body before her pride could block it. 40,000 meant her own apartment, a used truck that started every time, insurance, dental work, a life that did not depend on moss staying green in plastic trays. Eli saw the hesitation. "That is a generous offer for wet ground." Nora stood slowly. "Why do you want wet ground?" "Stormwater project. Some development around it. Town needs housing." "Town needs a ditch rerouted?" His expression changed for half a second. Then the smile came back. "You have been talking to Marianne." "I've been reading." "Reading won't make this place profitable." Nora looked at the trays beside her. "It already is." Eli glanced down, at the moss, at the mud on her sleeves, at the blue flags in the distance. For the first time, he looked less amused. 40,000 expires Friday." "Then it expires." His smile vanished completely. "You know, being stubborn is expensive." Nora picked up the tray. "So is being wrong." The town notice arrived 9 days later. Public hearing, drainage improvement proposal, Sable Road watershed, potential reclassification of multiple wet parcels, Lot 41 included. Nora read the letter 3 times in Rosa's driveway, while the mailbox door hung open. Her first thought was not anger. It was math. If the town rerouted water off the bog, the sphagnum would dry. If the sphagnum dried, Paul would cancel. If the edge dried, the cranberries would weaken. If the willow line failed, she lost the contractor. If water left, the crop left. By then she had made $3,870 in total revenue. Not profit, revenue. A town engineer with a map could erase all of it in one vote. The hearing was held in the school cafeteria. Eli arrived with printed boards, a consultant, and renderings of homes with porch lights glowing beside a fake pond. The project had a name, Sable Brook Commons. Not bog, not wetland, brook, commons. Words clean enough to hide a bulldozer. Eli spoke first. Jobs, tax base, housing, safer roads, better drainage. The town council listened like people being offered a future in color. Then Nora walked to the microphone with a folder so full it would not close. Her voice shook on her name. She hated that. My name is Nora Reyes. I own Lot 41. She opened the folder. I bought it for $13 because everyone thought it had no use. Someone in the back coughed. Since January, that parcel has generated $3,870 from live sphagnum, wild cranberries, and willow stakes. I have active buyers in Vermont, Ellsworth, and Portland. I have harvest maps showing rotation zones. I have pH readings averaging 4.2. I have photographs showing the planted edges my grandmother documented in 1979. She placed Carmen's notebook under the document camera. The screen showed the old pencil map. 13 marks. The cafeteria went quieter. This is not abandoned land, Nora said. It is unmanaged memory. She had not planned that line. It just came out. So she kept going. A 1-inch rain over 14 acres is almost 380,000 gallons of water. Right now, that water spreads through peat, moss, roots, and old channels. It slows down before it reaches basements and roads. If you drain it for development, the water does not disappear. It goes somewhere faster. The engineer shifted in his chair. That helped. I am not asking the town to believe in my dream. I am asking you not to destroy a working wetland business before it has had 1 full year to prove itself. Eli stood for rebuttal. He was calm. Miss Reyes has admirable passion, but passion is not infrastructure. Passion is not a housing plan. Passion does not repair roads. Nora gripped the folder until the cardboard bent. A councilwoman named Bethany Snow asked one question. Mr. Calder, if the drainage change is approved, who owns the developable parcels created by the lower water table? The room shifted. Eli paused too long. My company has options on some neighboring properties. How many? Several. The vote was not dramatic. It was procedural. 4 against reclassification, 3 for further study. No drainage change. Not yet. Nora walked out of the cafeteria into cold air and threw up behind the recycling bins. Then she laughed until she cried, because winning did not feel like victory. It felt like surviving a truck that missed by inches. The first year ended with numbers small enough to fit on one notebook page. Revenue, $16,940. Expenses, $9,780. Net, $7,160. Nora wrote the profit twice, because the first time looked like a mistake. $7,000 was not a fortune. It was not even a salary, but it was profit from land assessed at zero. It was proof. Rosa found her at the table near midnight, calculator still in hand. You made money from a place people said was useless. Nora nodded. Not enough. Enough to prove the insult was wrong. That stayed with her. The insult. Not the offer, not the laugh. The insult underneath all of it. Worthless. She had believed that word too many times in too many forms. Worthless job, worthless degree, worthless savings, worthless land. The bog was teaching her that worthless often meant unmeasured. That winter, Nora applied for organic wild crop certification. The fee was $1,700 after inspection and paperwork. It felt like dropping an anchor through her own bank account. The forms asked for land history, buffer zones, harvest practices, contamination risks, maps, cleaning procedures, storage procedures, labels, traceability. Traceability nearly broke her. Every tray needed a harvest zone. Every cranberry batch needed a date. Every willow bundle needed a lot number. Every invoice needed to match the map. For 2 weeks, Rosa's kitchen looked like a disaster relief office. Nora almost quit on a Wednesday at 2 a.m. because she could not figure out whether the South mat counted as Zone C or Zone D after she split the harvest rotation. She called Marianne and cried without meaning to. Marianne listened, then said, "Good. Now you are building a real operation." "I thought I was building a farm." "A real farm is paperwork with weather attached." The inspector came in April. He walked slowly, asked irritatingly specific questions. How did Nora prevent overharvest? How did she clean tools? How did she separate wild cranberries from purchased product? How did she know no prohibited chemical had been used? She showed him the notebook, the maps, the receipts, the untouched buffer at the road edge, the water tests, the clean storage shelves in Rosa's garage. At the end, he stood beside the north pool and looked across the moss. "You don't do much to it," he said. Nora's stomach tightened. "I try not to." He nodded. "That may be the best thing about it." The certificate arrived 3 weeks later. Nora opened the envelope standing in the driveway and sat down on the gravel because her knees forgot their job. Certified organic wild crop. The price changes landed like weather. Paul raised live sphagnum to $18 a flat and ordered 100 flats for summer. June put organic wild bog cranberry on her pastry labels and doubled her order. The Portland contractor didn't care about organic, but a second restoration company did. They wanted willow stakes, sphagnum plugs, and sedge divisions bundled as wetland repair kits. Repair kits. Nora loved those words because they made the bog sound like a workshop, not a swamp. In 2022, revenue hit $68,300. Nora bought a used pickup with a dented tailgate and a passenger door that squealed like an animal. She rented a shed near the highway and hired her cousin Mateo 3 mornings a week. Mateo complained for exactly 2 days. Then he learned the sphagnum buyer paid on delivery and stopped complaining. They built drying racks, wash tables, labeled shelves, and a cooler out of salvaged panels. Nothing matched. Everything worked. The operation still looked ridiculous from the outside. A young woman, her cousin, a truck full of moss, and a bog that could swallow a boot without remorse. But invoices have a way of changing how people speak. By August, people who used to say, "Nora's swamp thing," started saying, "Nora's wetland business." By October, the bank that had denied her a $5,000 equipment loan called to ask if she still needed financing. She did, but not from them. The storm came in December. Not snow, rain. 3 days of it. Warm, violent, wrong for the season. Culverts overflowed, basements filled. A section of Sable Road washed out 2 miles south of the bog. Nora and Mateo moved what they could from the highway shed to higher shelves. They sandbagged the door. They tied down trays. They checked the bog twice a day until the water rose over the flags. On the 3rd night, wind tore half the shed roof loose. Nora arrived before dawn and found insulation hanging like wet skin. 6 racks were ruined. 200 flats contaminated. The cooler had shorted. A month's worth of product gone. Mateo stood beside her in the rain, silent. Nora did the math and stopped halfway because the number made her dizzy. Then Rosa arrived, then Marianne, then June from the bakery, wearing rubber boots and a coat over pajamas. Then Paul called from Vermont and said, "Do not send damaged flats. Send me what survives. I will advance the next order." Nora stood in the wrecked shed with rain running down her face and realized the bog was no longer something she was trying to save alone. Cleanup took 9 days. The loss was real, but the flood left something behind. When the water dropped, it exposed the west edge, a strip Nora had ignored because it was tangled with alder and too unstable to work. Under the broken branches were raised hummocks covered in low evergreen leaves and red stems. Marianne saw them and went still. "Do you know what that is?" Nora was too tired for mystery. "Something else I can't afford to understand." "Wintergreen." Nora blinked. "The candy?" "The plant. Leaves, oil, specialty herbal buyers. Not huge, but high value if harvested right. And look there." She pointed farther in. Dark berries on trailing vines. More cranberry. Older bed. Carmen's map only marked the east side, but your great-grandfather must have planted both. Nora looked across the flooded, damaged, stubborn ground. The storm had taken a month of work. It had also shown her the bog was bigger than her understanding. That became her 3rd rule. Loss shows the map in a different color. In 2023, she stopped acting like the bog was an experiment. She wrote a business plan, a real one, not wishes in a notebook. Projections, product lines, rotation schedules, labor hours, risk, insurance, storage. A reserve fund because weather had made its point. She applied for a beginning farmer loan. The loan officer read the application twice. "You're asking for $32,000 to expand a wetland products business." "Yes." "That is unusual." "I know." He looked at the contracts. Paul's Nursery, 2 restoration companies, June's Bakery, a regional co-op interested in dried wintergreen leaf if she could document harvest and handling. "Your collateral is a bog." "My collateral is purchase orders." That line worked better than she expected. The loan was approved at 4.1%. Nora spent the money before fear could talk her out of it. A walk-behind tracked carrier for moving trays without tearing the mats. A better cooler, wash sinks, shade cloth, packaging, insurance, and wages. Not favors, not family guilt, wages. She hired Mateo full-time and brought in 2 seasonal workers who learned quickly that bog work is half balance, half patience, and half apologizing to your boots. The math was no longer cute. It was a company. Revenue for 2023, $142,800. Net profit after wages, loan payments, insurance, and repairs, $61,400. Nora paid herself $38,000. The first paycheck she wrote to herself sat on the table for an hour before she deposited it. She kept touching it like it might vanish. That fall, Eli Calder tried one more time. He did not come with an offer. He came with an apology dressed as a business proposal. Nora was loading wintergreen leaf into the truck when his black pickup rolled up the lane. He got out slowly, older than he had looked 3 years earlier, though maybe she was just less afraid of him. "I misjudged this place," he said. Nora closed the truck door. "You tried to drain it." "I did." "That is more than misjudging." He took that. Then he pulled a folder from under his arm. "I own the old gravel lot by the highway. 8 acres, dry access, power, no wetland issue. I was going to put storage units there. I will lease it to you cheap for 5 years if you want a packing building." Nora laughed once. Not because it was funny, because life had strange manners. "Why?" Eli looked toward the bog. "Because every road project we had after that storm used your place as the example. Slow the water, hold the water, work with the water. Council says it like scripture now." He looked back at her. "And because I was wrong." Nora wanted the moment to feel cleaner than it did. It didn't. Apologies do not erase hearings, fear, or the feeling of being cornered by someone with more money. But land teaches patience, even with people. She took the folder. I will read it. That's fair. The lease became her first packing house, not because forgiveness is simple, because opportunity does not always arrive with a face you like. By 2024, the business had a name painted on the side of the building: Sable Water Products. Under it, in smaller letters, Wild Bog Crops, Restoration Plants, Living Wetland Supplies. Nora hated the name at first. Then it started appearing on invoices, delivery vans, co-op shelves, and the lanyards at a regional conservation conference where she gave a talk and forgot half her opening sentence because the room was larger than any room she had ever addressed. Afterward, a woman from Vermont waited until the crowd thinned. She was in her 50s, with cracked hands and the tired look of someone carrying land nobody else wanted. "My brother says I should sell our marsh," the woman said. "He says there's nothing in it." Nora heard the echo so clearly it almost hurt. "What grows there?" "I don't know." "Then that is the first job." The woman smiled a little. "What if he is right?" "Then you will know. But don't let someone who never looked closely be the one who decides." Nora went back to the hotel that night, opened Carmen's notebook, and wrote that line on the last blank page. "Do not let someone who never looked closely decide." The final numbers for 2024 came in on a snowy morning. Revenue, $246,000. Net profit, $128,700. 8 employees in peak season, 4 year-round. 21 acres under management after Nora bought the adjoining 7 from a retired logger who said he was glad somebody finally found a use for ground that fought every tractor he ever put near it. Nora paid off Rosa's car, replaced the roof on the packing house, bought her first new pair of boots without checking the price first. Then she drove to the cemetery with Carmen's field notebook on the passenger seat. The grave was under a white pine. Snow gathered along the stone. Nora brushed it clean with her sleeve. "I figured it out," she said. Then she corrected herself. "No, you figured it out. I just finally listened." She placed 13 cranberries on the snow, 1 for each marker. They looked impossibly red against the white. For a long time, she stayed there without speaking. Some grief takes years to become gratitude. Some inheritance does not look like money until someone does the work. In March 2025, 5 years after the auction, Nora returned to the Public Works garage. The county no longer held tax sales there. Everything had moved online. The room smelled less like diesel now, more like stored salt and old cardboard. The buckets were gone. The snowplows sat in the same corner. A new auction sheet was taped to the bulletin board, but nobody was looking at it. Nora stood where the folding chairs had been and tried to find the exact spot where she had raised her hand. $13. A number small enough to be a joke. A number large enough to split her life in two. She took Carmen's notebook from her coat pocket and opened to the inside cover. The water is the crop. Nora understood it now. Water had been the product, the protection, the proof, the thing everyone tried to remove because they did not know how to count what it was doing. They had seen wet ground. Carmen had seen a system. Eli had seen delay. Nora had learned to see inventory, weather, memory, and time working together in a language slower than money, but older than ownership. Outside, her truck waited with the Sable Water logo on the door. Mateo had texted twice about a shipment leaving for Vermont. A co-op buyer wanted to talk about expanding wintergreen. A school group was arriving at 10 to tour the bog. The day was already full. But Nora stood in the empty garage for one more minute. Because once, in that same room, 46 people had laughed at land priced below lunch. And every one of them had missed the most important thing about value. It does not become real when people recognize it. It becomes visible when someone refuses to look away.